Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining in this week on the Master Instructor Roundtable. I'm Regional Master Instructor Marty Miller here, as always, with co-host, dear friend, Miss Wendy Batts. Wendy, how you doing today?
I'm great, Marty. How are you?
Great. It's going to be a very interesting topic this week. And, you know, the name of the topic is going to catch people's attention. But we are going to talk today with a very special guest who Wendy will introduce. But we are going to talk about how to look good naked.
Yes. Who doesn't want to look good naked? And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to bring Dr. Guillermo Escalante in to join us, because this man, he's an assistant dean. He's a professor. He's on the NASM advisory board. He's also one of our lead subject matter experts when we built the bodybuilding and physique and bodybuilding course that you can find on NASM. And so we figured Dr. G would be the best person to discuss this topic with us. So let's go ahead and bring him on in. Hey, Dr. G, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we know that you're taking a lot of time out of your schedule to join us live today on the Master Instructor Roundtable. And I'm just going to start with the questions, because the first question that I get all the time, especially when we talk about how to look good naked, are, well, I want to tone my body. I need to tone it. I want to tone it so I look a certain way. But can you tell everyone and myself even, what does that really mean?
Yeah, I know when I used to work as a personal trainer and I would ask people, hey, you know, what are your goals? That was one of the biggest requests I would have is I want to improve my muscle tone. I want to get quote unquote tone. And one of the things that I usually when I'm teaching individuals is I basically try to break down that misnomer. It's like, what is muscle tone? And really, you know, muscle tone is basically a component of two things. You can't really tone a muscle. It's really a look that we're after. And that look that you're after is basically having low body fat and having a little bit of muscle on there. Now, the quantity of muscle is going to be dependent on you and what your particular goals are. But you can't have a muscle, quote unquote, look toned if there's no muscle there. So we want to make sure that we have enough muscle so that it can show, and then also reduce the body fat, particularly the subcutaneous fat, which is the fat that's underneath the skin, so that you can actually appreciate and see that muscularity as you go through. And then, of course, there's different levels of leanness, and that you can go kind of above and beyond and get extra lean. And now you may be able to see muscle striations, which is now that may be beyond what you may want to see. And then kind of finding that nice midway point where most people are kind of comfortable with where the muscle actually looks good.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. Makes a lot of sense. But one of the things that I've always heard, and I'm sure Wendy could vouch for this, and it's the same with you, Dr. G, is people say, you know, can you turn fat into muscle? You know, can you explain why this is not possible?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things, you know, that muscle turns to fat, fat turns to muscle. And that is another misnomer in the fitness industry. It just simply does not happen. There are two different biological tissues. So you have muscle that's primarily composed of protein, and actually muscle tissue in itself, you have the primary composition of muscle tissue is actually water. So it's over 70% water. Then you have protein, and you have some connective tissue that's going to be in there. And those are going to be your major components of the actual muscle tissue. By the way, muscle also has a little bit of fat. So you have intramuscular fat that's actually part of the muscle tissue as well. That's actually inside of the muscle itself. So you have these different components. Of course, the difference is adipose tissue is made of primarily fat tissue. It's adipose tissue. So it's going to be about 85% of that. It's going to have other components, a little bit of water, but it's going to have much less of a water component than muscle tissue. Fat is only going to have typically, about 10% of that's going to be water. And there's going to be other small amounts of other molecules in there. But you really can't, physiologically, they're just two different types of tissue. One doesn't turn into another. So you have to build muscle and you have to lose fat. And of course, the fat cells themselves, they actually just shrink or they hypertrophy. So they get bigger or they get smaller. So as you're losing body fat, those fat cells just simply get smaller. The number of fat cells really doesn't change. You have the same number of fat cells, you just actually have smaller amounts or smaller versions of those same fat cells. And then, of course, as you are overeating and you become less physically active, what occurs then is you create this calorie surplus. Your body's not utilizing the energy, so it's going to store it. Where's it going to primarily store it? It's going to store it as fat stores. And then now those fat cells are going to grow or hypertrophy. They're going to get slightly bigger. And then if you go in a caloric deficit, more physical activity, now those fat cells are going to start to shrink. And then you're going to actually, the size of those cells is going to be smaller. And then you're going to lose the body fat in that regard. Muscle is another completely different component where you actually have to build up that muscle. And that's practically done by increasing muscle protein synthesis. So to build muscle, you have to be in what's called a positive nitrogen balance, which means you have to basically have a higher amount of muscle protein synthesis and a lower amount of muscle protein breakdown. How do you do that? Well, you do that with resistance training, and you do that with appropriate nutrition, taking in adequate number of calories and an adequate quantity of protein, so that actually you can support the muscle protein synthesis process so that the muscle itself can build.
Love it.
You make that sound so easy, and this is all it is. So if you guys have questions for Dr. G, please be sure to put them in the chat. We are live. We want to make sure that we get these questions answered. Today, we're talking about how to look good naked with Marty Miller and myself, and of course, Dr. G being our special guest. And you talked about, and this is one of my favorite things that I often get as well, when we start talking about strength training and we're going to start lifting heavy, we're really going to start working on gaining muscle. That automatically sets off this red flag, especially, I hate to say this, but unfortunately to my females, that if I lift heavy or if I lift weights even, I'm going to get big and bulky. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I wish it was that easy to gain muscle, because otherwise every bodybuilder would be 1,000 pounds of lean muscle mass, and it's just not that easy. Now, remember that the world's largest individuals, that the top tier ranked bodybuilders, they spend years upon years upon years just to build that muscularity. And to give you an example, having the world's best genetics, and using the latest amount of technology in terms of bodybuilding supplements, bodybuilding nutrition, bodybuilding training. Really, even the most gifted individuals may be able to gain 30 to 50 pounds of muscle mass over the course of their career. So it's really not very common. You see a few that maybe reach that threshold. They actually put on 50, maybe 60 pounds of muscle mass over the course of 15, 20 years of doing it over and over again. That being said, most of us are not that genetically gifted where we can actually gain 30, 40, 50 pounds of muscle mass over the course of 10 years, 20 years. So this is their life for so long. So that being said, for the average individual, sure, you'll gain a little bit of muscle mass, and depending on your genetics, and depending on your training protocol and what it is you're doing, and how you're eating, you can gain a little bit of muscle mass. But the reality is most individuals will gain, at most 1, maybe 1.5 pounds of muscle per month. And you're gonna have initial newbie gains for the first few months, and then after that it's gonna plateau because you're gonna start reaching your genetic potential. So yes, you can still build muscle, but it's not a straight line. It's not a linear progression. So it kind of goes this way, and then it's going to start tearing off. And then once you've been building for a while, so after a couple of years of training, 1 or 2 years of training, you don't just continually grow muscle in a very easy fashion. It actually takes a lot of work. So that being said, being bulky is really not a problem that 99.9% of the people are going to have. The other thing you want to think about too is you have to look at the hormone profiles, which are going to be a little bit different between males and females, although there's been some studies to kind of even question that component. But regardless, there are various factors that are going to be called into play for your ability to put on muscle mass over time. The reality is it's just not that easy to gain muscle, especially large quantities of muscle. So getting bulky is not a problem. It's just not.
Yes, I can testify that for all my years of trying my best. So it's good. But can you talk about the muscle gains that we would usually see in like a training program? And I know you're big into research, so maybe you can talk about like the longitudinal studies that we've seen in what's called natural participants.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at some of the training protocols that you see, you really don't see a lot of muscle gained over time. So you really look at some of these in terms of what kind of muscle gains you can actually expect. As I stated earlier, really what you see is in the neighborhood of about 1 to 2 pounds of muscle, and this is over the course of a training program that's specifically geared for the gaining the muscle mass over time. So there's been several studies that actually have kind of been pooled, and then you can actually see this here. So the one example that I wanted to give was this meta-analysis with they took 150 people, almost 2,000 participants in there, and they basically showed a net gain of lean mass of about for untrained people of about 1.5 kilograms, so that's a little over 3 pounds, and then of only 1 kilogram for the trained individual. So this is what I was saying earlier, that as you have more training experience, you're actually gonna have the ability to put on muscle mass is gonna significantly decrease. So you can see that untrained people typically gain, again, about maybe 3-4 pounds of muscle mass over time, whereas untrained individuals only gain about maybe 2 pounds of muscle mass over time. So that kind of gives you, again, a good idea of what you can expect over time. And you can just see that, I mean, looking at 2,000 people that train in training protocols specifically designed for that, you're really only seeing a handful of pounds in a 10 or 12-week training program.
Awesome. Well, I know there's always a lot of confusion around the situation when it comes to what you just talked about. You've got, in order to lean out, there needs to be a calorie deficit. In order to gain muscle, you need to think about eating protein. So sometimes increasing your amount of calories that you, in order to quote, grow or get big. So can you talk a little bit about how can someone lose fat but gain muscle in the same time, or is that even possible?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually do a lot of talks on this, which is that term that we use is called body recomposition. So body recomposition is the phenomenon of gaining muscle and losing fat at the same time, which is kind of the unicorn that we're all trying to accomplish. Like, who doesn't want to gain some muscle and lose fat at the same time? And the bottom line is it is possible, but it depends. It's more possible in certain individuals. So the people that are going to be more able to do that are going to be those that are very untrained, detrained individuals that are sedentary, those that are overweight or obese and are sedentary. Those are the primary candidates that are going to be able to gain muscle and lose fat actually rather easily. In fact, if you look at some studies, these individuals they don't even have to lift weights. Sometimes even just doing a cardiovascular intervention, they're able to gain muscle mass because they're so deconditioned that the aerobic exercise itself is enough of a stimulus to actually build some muscle over time. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have individuals, let's say you've been lifting for 10, 15 years, you're kind of at the top of your genetic ceiling already, you're doing a lot of things right, you're eating the right amount of calories, right amount of protein, you've been training right for 10 years, 15 years, those individuals are going to have very little success in being able to body recomp because they're probably already have more muscle mass than most individuals. Again, they're at the top of their genetic ceiling, and they're probably relatively lean since they're doing all of the things right. And then there's, of course, people that are kind of in the middle. So if you've had an injury, for example, and you have to take a break and you're going to go back to training, again, you're probably going to do some body recomposition at that point in time. If you have training experience and you maybe took a 2 or 3 year break for whatever reason, and you're going to go back to training, you'll probably be able to do both at the same time. That being said, it's not necessarily, if you're a very trained individual, I'm going to say it's not the best way to approach your goals, because you really kind of want to prioritize. I either want to lose body fat or I want to gain muscle for the very trained individual. The other people, you could probably get away with a little bit of both, depending on what their primary goals are. Of course, the road to either gaining muscle or losing fat is going to be a little slower if you're trying to accomplish both at the same time, because to lose body fat most efficiently, you have to create a caloric deficit. And to gain muscle most efficiently, you actually have to eat at a slight surplus. So you have that conundrum there to be able to do both most effectively.
Gotcha. Thank you for that, Dr. G. And for those of you that are just joining us today on the Master Instructor Roundtable, myself, Marty Miller, here with co-host Wendy Batts, we are talking about how to look good naked with expert and contributor from our physique and bodybuilding coach. He's on our advisory board, Dr. Guillermo Escalante. So, Dr. G, question for you. If I want to lean out, or if people want to lean out, I think there's been some rumors about weightlifting, not weightlifting. Can you talk about the advantage of using resistance training and maybe even more like your bodybuilding type of protocol if somebody is looking to lean out?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think this is another misnomer, because I've even caught some of my students when they were doing presentations in an exercise prescription class, and then they would say, Mrs. Jones wants to lose body fat. Therefore, we're going to only do cardio for the first 2 months of the program. And then, hopefully if they presented that, they would know why they made a mistake, because aerobic training is important, but one of the keys to weight loss is actually resistance training. And of course, you have to look at, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. We want to differentiate between weight loss and fat loss, because they are very different. They're similar, but they're indeed quite different. So weight loss is just, what did you lose on the scale, right? I went from 200 pounds down to 170 pounds. Great, you lost weight. Fat loss can look different, right? What we really want to do when we're actually working with a client, we don't just want weight loss, we want fat loss. And fat loss is going to be where the money is really at. We don't want to lose water weight. We don't really necessarily want to lose muscle mass, but we want to lose fat mass. And that's the important thing. So when you're creating a program to do that, this is where the weight training component is going to be very critical. You may not lose as much, essentially more fat weight, by doing the resistance training program. So doing the resistance training program at least 3 to 5 days a week is actually quite critical to help you to accomplish that. And why is that? Well, number one, you do burn calories when you're doing weight training, but compare it to maybe doing an hour of weight training compared to an hour of aerobic exercise, high intensity aerobic exercise, you're probably going to burn less calories doing the weight training versus the aerobic training in that 1 hour. But over the course of a 24-hour period, you're actually going to probably burn more calories in the resistance training than in the aerobic training over the course of that 24-hour period. And part of that is as your body is phased with that resistance training protocol, it's going to have to recover, and it's going to have to spend a lot of energy for you to be able to come back and to repair those muscles so that you can actually come back and weight train again. So that's one of the reasons. Number two, it's going to help you maintain your muscle mass, or maybe increase your muscle mass, which is going to increase your metabolic rate slightly. So we used to say for every pound of muscle, you get to burn an extra 35 to 50 calories. That's actually wrong. It's not that much. I wish it was that much. But for every pound of muscle, you do get to burn about an extra 6 calories per pound of muscle. So at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like a lot. But if you add an extra 10 pounds of muscle mass, that's an extra 60 calories per day, which is not that much in the big picture. But remember, you're also going to be burning more with everything that you're doing. When you're exercising, you're going to be burning more. When you're sleeping, you're going to be burning more. When you're walking, you're going to be burning, because muscle is more metabolically active. It's going to require more energy to be able to be to keep it there. So that's another benefit of that. And then, of course, the obvious is you're obviously going to be able to, well, that's going to help you potentially eat more. Number two, which is who doesn't want to be able to eat more? You're allotted a few more calories per day. And then lastly, that's what's going to help you maintain that muscle mass. If you're losing that muscle mass, your metabolism is going to slow down over time. And we see that when you go in a very high caloric deficit and you're doing only aerobic training, you see your metabolism just tank down. Even just going in an aggressive calorie deficit, your metabolism is going to tank down, and you're going to lose what you don't want to lose, which is that muscle mass. And you're not going to look, quote unquote, toned if you lose muscle mass. You're just not.
Well, that brings me to another question about timelines, because, with the model that we talk about every 4 to 6 weeks, we want to reevaluate someone's program. We utilize mainly movement assessments, obviously, but then we do, look at everything from body fat. I mean, whatever assessments we've done in the beginning, we want to reassess. So what are some realistic timelines for somebody that wants to lose body fat but start gaining muscle?
Yeah, so I want the name to success is consistency, and giving yourself enough time. So you don't want to set unrealistic timelines. And this is, people do this all the time. They want to, they've gained 40, 50 pounds of fat, from the time they were 40 to the time they were 20 to the time they were 40 or 50, right? So it took them 20 or 30 years to gain a pound or two of fat every year. And now they come to see you, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, it's my 30th year class reunion, and I want to lose 40 pounds in the next 10 weeks. Well, that's not very realistic. So this is really important to actually be able to stay on top of this and set realistic timelines. So what is a realistic timeline? I go by percentage of weight, and the percentage of weight that you actually want to lose is about 0.5% to 1% per week. So if you weigh 200 pounds, so 0.5% to 1% of that per week is about the high end of fat loss that you want to do. Because number one, you're gonna be able to create a caloric deficit that's enough, but you're not going to be starving yourself, and with that, you're going to be able to retain a lot of that muscle mass over time. So realistically, again, a 200-pound person losing 1% of body fat or 1% of fat every week, that's roughly about 1.5 to 2 pounds per week. If you're 150 pounds, you're going to be losing between 1 to 1.5 pounds per week. And that's kind of a good marker. And that's a very aggressive marker, by the way. The low end of that marker is going to be half of that. So I like to give individual clients a range. So you give them a low end range and a high end range. And then if they're kind of meeting that goal, that gives them a good landmark into what is realistic. And then you just do a reverse mathematical engineering in terms of how long it's going to take them to do that, right? So if you're 200 pounds and you want to get down to 180 and you're going to lose between 1.5 to 2 pounds per week, well, now you know that it's going to take you about 20 to 30 weeks. 10 to 20 weeks to be able to do that, depending on how long, how fast that fat loss process is.
Excellent. Dr. G, can you talk about those individuals that are in prolonged calories deficits, that are doing their cardio, doing their resistance training? What happens, especially in more of a natural competitor? What's the good, the bad? What are they likely to see if they're in that prolonged state?
Yeah, so what happens after you're in a prolonged state for fat loss, there's actually been several case studies where they actually look at natural physique competitors, and they're doing a very aggressive calorie deficit for a prolonged period of time. So in one study, there was a 21-year-old bodybuilder, and in 14 weeks, the athlete was actually provided with a very specific nutrition and training plan. And they encourage them to consume a variety of foods, not neglect any particular macronutrients. They were told to exercise regularly, but not excessively, and that exercise program was controlled. They incorporated appropriate rest days into the training. But in the individual loss, close to 12 kilograms of fat. So that's about 25 pounds of, actually not fat, of body mass. So about 25 pounds total was what they lost. And in that, they actually lost about 7 kilograms. So roughly 15, 16 pounds of that were actually fat. And the rest was actually what we don't want to lose, which is fat-free mass or lean body mass. So you can see they lost a lot of body water, and then they also lost some of that muscle as well, which is really what we want to try to avoid. And this is somebody that's doing everything right? They're getting adequate protein, they're training right, they're training consistently, they're not avoiding any macronutrients, getting enough protein in, somebody that's experienced. So you can see that even in those individuals, it's a very natural phenomenon, even in just a 14-week period, for you to lose some of that muscle tissue over time. What happened also, their metabolic rate actually decreased by almost over 100 calories per day, which is, again, it's not something that you want to do long term. So this is why you really want to create a subtle caloric deficit, not a very aggressive one. It's gonna get you the results there a little bit slower, but it's going to get you there for the long haul. And remember, one of the biggest problems that people have is weight loss is hard, but weight regain is very common among most individuals. So most individuals that you see, they lose 20, 30 pounds over a 10, 15-week period. Great, they do a great job. And then what do? They go back to their old habits and their old eating patterns, and then they're missing workouts, and then 6 months later, they've gained the weight back, usually with interest. So these are some of the issues that we see. And that's where I think it's important for us to intervene and let them know that a slow, consistent approach, a lifestyle approach to healthier fat loss is really a better approach. So they're not going on this yo-yo approach to weight loss, weight regain, weight loss, weight regain.
Great. Thank you for that. And Wendy, if you don't mind, I'll ask a quick follow-up question to Dr. G is, NASM, here we are. Can you talk about phases 1 and 2 and why these phases are so important for this type of goal?
Yeah. So, I think people sometimes want to go automatically into, the let's build as much muscle as possible. But particularly with the clients that you're working with, if you're working with an untrained individual, somebody who's new to the weight room, that's the majority of the clients. The reality is most people are going to be sedentary. You really want to build that foundation. And that foundation, the NASM CPT model actually allows you to be able to do that. So in that phase 1, when you're using the lighter loads and you're not using excessive volume, excessive intensity, you're really allowing the individuals to learn appropriate technique, which is going to be critical for them to develop. Number 1, probably avoiding injury, making sure that they have the right motor pattern. You're getting enough repetitions in so that they can learn the appropriate motor pattern, and you can progress that movement slowly. You can make sure that they're knowing what muscles are working with what exercise, where they should be feeling certain things. You can also have the ability to maybe implement other components of your training program, because maybe they have range of motion limitations or other restrictions, and you can address those during this point in time before you actually start progressing the load. Because if you don't address those things early, it's going to lead to poor technique, which is going to potentially lead to injury over time, which is going to impede your progress over time. So you want to make sure that you're learning that exercise appropriately, and it gives you a nice logical progression, and it's the foundation of everything. In phase 2, it gives you a nice natural bridge to be able to increase the volume and increase the intensity of the exercise, which is a great gradual progression into the next phase, because we know that one of the drivers of muscle hypertrophy is actually driven by total volume that is done. So this allows you to do that, but you're still not necessarily pounding excessively heavier weights yet. And you can still focus on muscle endurance at this point in time as well. And then that kind of leads nicely into the phase 3, which is the hypertrophy phase. So now you've built that foundation, you've worked on technique, motor patterns, you've worked on potential range of motion limitations or other restrictions that may be there. And now you can actually progress the exercises accordingly in that hypertrophy building phase.
Thank you for that.
Awesome. Well, and that kind of brings me into, with you being our lead subject matter expert in the physique and bodybuilding course that NASM launched, there's some confusion, I think, about the course itself. And I think obviously you're the best person to ask this question for. If a trainer doesn't really have a client that really wants to do, bodybuilding, that's just not their interest. However, they want to lose fat, they want to gain muscle, they want to look better naked. Is this a good course for them? And can you kind of talk through the different components of the course and how it can correlate and really connect with these individuals and help us as trainers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and to be honest, I mean, for most of the clients that a lot of people are going to work with, one of their main goals is going to be to, they just want to look better. And at the end of the day, the physique bodybuilding program and course is designed to help people look better. Now, it might be taken to the next level where they may actually want to do a photo shoot, be on stage, be competitive. And you don't necessarily need to go to that last step of going on stage or going for that photo shoot. But the principles to get there are actually exactly the same, because one of the things that physique bodybuilders want to look for is you want to have symmetry, you want to have proportion, which is going to help the body kind of flow nicely, right? It's like you don't want to look out of balance with yourself. So if you have excellent pecs and excellent biceps, but you have no back, that doesn't look so good aesthetically. If you have a phenomenal upper body and no legs, that doesn't look so good aesthetically. So one of the principles of the physique and bodybuilding program is kind of making sure that you're training in a balanced fashion, so you can create that aesthetic look, and that aesthetic look kind of gives you what most people are after. You obviously want to present at some point in lower levels of body fat. Well, the physique bodybuilding program teaches you the principles that even the highest level individuals are actually approaching. Again, you're doing the same thing. The process doesn't look different. It just means of how far are you taking it, right? So I'm going to give you two examples. A physique bodybuilding competitor, male competitor, may need to get down to 3 or 4 or 5% body fat to be successful in their competitive nature. Your average Joe client doesn't need to get there. However, if they're 20% body fat or 25% body fat, they could probably afford to get down to 12% body fat. And the principles to get there, to get an individual from 12% body fat down to 5, are the same principles that you get someone from 20 down to 10% body fat. So you're going to learn some of those principles. It's just at the end of the spectrum for the bodybuilder, you're just pushing it a little bit further, pushing the limits a little bit more. It's going to take a little more time to get there. Same thing for the building muscle part. A bodybuilder is going to require more time to be able to build that muscularity, and it's going to require maybe a little more attention to detail, to dotting every I and crossing every T. For the average Joe, same principles are going to apply, but maybe you don't need to go to that final extreme. But you understanding what it takes, you can now actually kind of customize, and you can start with certain principles that you can work with, and then depending on the goals of that individual, you can now actually apply more or apply less, but your toolbox is now bigger, and you can implement those tools accordingly to really get your clients to be successful. Again, and we talk about diet, we talk about supplementation, we talk about cardiovascular training, we talk about recovery, we talk about obviously nutrition, all of the macronutrients, we talk about micronutrients. So we have all of these tools that are very important to pay attention to. And whether you're going to compete or not, the principles still stay the same. It's just a matter of to what level are you pushing that individual.
Well, I took the course and I personally loved it because, I've obviously taken pretty much every course that NASM offered. So I always find new information super helpful. And there was a lot of little nuggets in there that I'm like, oh man, I forgot about this, or this was a really good reminder, or the way that you guys went in depth into a lot of those topics that you discussed, I think it was very, very well done. And I am a very hard critic, just so you know. But Dr. G, we could talk to you all day, and I know that you have things to do, but I think it's really important for us to bring up, I know our producer, Eric, is going to put up a graphic, and it's a graphic talking about Beyond the Abstract. And that's something that you do on the NASM Performance channel on Instagram. So while that's being put up, can you talk through what is beyond the abstract, when do you do it, and what's the purpose actually?
Yeah, absolutely. So Beyond the Abstract is actually an awesome podcast live that we do on Instagram Live at the NASM Performance session. So I do a collaborative session with NASM Performance and my channel, which is at Dr. GFit. And we do it typically every 2 weeks. So our next episode is actually going to be on Friday, the 22nd, so a week from tomorrow. And here we're going to actually bring one of my friends, who is Nick Rolnick. He's actually one of the leading experts on blood flow restriction training. He's a physical therapist. And we're going to talk about some of the nuances on there. But in all of these different sessions, what we do is we break down a study or any other peer-reviewed literature. So sometimes we break down not narrative reviews. We may break down meta-analyses, so different types of studies or original research studies. And often people just read the abstract, which is just the very basic one paragraph summary of what it is, which is not bad. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. I read abstracts too, but we dive beyond that abstract and we dive deep into the literature. And we go into what's the background of the study? Why did they do the study? What question were they trying to answer? What kind of methodology did they use to try to answer the question? What are some of the limitations in the methodology? Even though the study says this and kind of highlights the big picture, what are some things that we can really extrapolate from this particular study? Does it actually apply to me? Does it apply to my population, the people that I work with? We also look at the statistical analysis that was utilized. Again, what kind of limitations do we see from there? And then we look at also what other future questions do we need answered, or can we maybe or have been answered from this particular study that we can look at? And then again, what can we glean from that particular study? So it really kind of gives us a deep dive into the literature, the current literature in the exercise science. And we cover everything related. We cover sometimes aerobic training, we cover range of motion training, we cover building muscle, we will cover building strength, we cover nutrition, dietary supplements. So last week we actually covered a topic on creatine. We've covered collagen protein supplementation. We're going to be talking in a couple of weeks on the Impossible Burger. So this is basically looking at a vegan source of a burger versus a beef burger. And sometimes I break down studies, or sometimes I bring out other guests that are actually the investigators that have done that study, and then we'll ask some questions related to some of their findings. So it's a very fun event. We usually have a lot of people drop in. You can ask questions. And then the last thing that we really try to do is, what's the take-home message? What are the practical applications that we can glean? Because sometimes people read science and then they're like, well, but what does that mean for me or my clients? So what we like to do is bring that take-home message. It's like, what can I actually draw from this that's going to be applicable for my clients? So that's what the Beyond the Abstract is. As you saw, we typically go every couple of weeks. We've been trying to go on Wednesdays recently, but we're going to be, sometimes we switch days, but it's usually in the mornings, Pacific Standard Time, or early afternoons in the Eastern Standard Time. And again, it's in the NASM Performance channel. You can just log in live. The cool thing is we record it. So if you missed the live, you can go back in and you can go to the NASM Performance channel and you can read. You can listen to the whole podcast there, or the whole live session, and you can see what questions were answered. So it's a great way. I interact with Tony, and we have a good time talking science.
Yes, and you guys do such a great job. If again, it's on NASM Performance on Instagram, be sure to tune in, because I know for me, it helps me understand research. And Marty and I talk about the importance of understanding research, having the rationales to the why questions you know that you're going to be getting. So if you're really uncertain about some of those whys, be sure to tune in for that, because I think you guys do a phenomenal job. And I was really glad when they decided they were going to start doing that with you, because you do it. Excellent job. So before we end it, and as you said, you have to talk about, what is the key takeaways and what is the most important thing we should have gotten out of today. So Dr. G, the final question that we have for you is, what would be the top things that you want to leave us with if somebody wants to know how to look good naked?
All right. So how to look good naked. Number one is don't be afraid of food. You have to eat. Food is your friend. And you can't, even if you have to create a caloric deficit, you still have to eat. You just have to eat the right quantity of things and the right quality of things over time. Number two is make sure that you're doing resistance training. If you're not weight training at least 3 days a week, you're doing it wrong. You're not going to look good naked doing less resistance training than 3 days a week. It's really important to make sure that you can spread your workouts in over time. Cardio is also an important component of it, but don't over cardio. In fact, if you have to choose between resistance training and cardio, choose resistance training 100% of the time. You can create cardiovascular exercise is just another way to create a caloric deficit, and you can create a caloric deficit by just eating a little bit less. That being said, cardiovascular exercise is important for other reasons, and you should incorporate it. So I'm not saying don't do it, but you shouldn't be doing hours and hours of cardio. 20 to 40 minutes of cardio 3 to 5 days a week is probably all you need on the high end of things. And then your weight training, again, minimum 3, preferably 4 or 5 days per week would be a great approach to be able to do that. Be patient. Being patient is very important. You're not going to look good naked overnight. So give yourself plenty of time to set these realistic timelines and make sure that you're progressing accordingly your programs. Because if you're not progressing and you're not doing progressive overload, you're kind of spinning your wheels. And I'm going to also say one thing with regards to your training. Yes, you should change your exercise selection, but don't change your exercise selection every workout or every week. Give yourself, you should be able to learn particular movement patterns and then stay on those movement patterns. So choose a workout and then stick to that workout for minimum 4 weeks, maybe 8, maybe even 12 weeks, and progress that workout and then switch things up over time. Unless, of course, there's an exercise not working for you, you need to modify something because you have an injury or something. But other than that, you should really try to stick to the workout program for a period of time, a minimum of 4 weeks, maybe even up to 10 or 12 weeks if things are working, and then progress the workout accordingly with more repetitions, more weight, or alternating rest periods. But you don't need to do a different exercise every single workout because then you're not progressing at all. You need to do progressive overload. You need to do the same exercise over time, at least have exercises that are consistently the same.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. G. You gave us a lot of great points. Great wrap up there. We can't thank you enough. Wendy, great idea. I love the topic. As always, you come up with some great names for these things. So most importantly, thank you all for whoever joined us today on the Master Instructor Roundtable. We can't thank you enough for taking time out of your schedule. And we will always look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you.